So today we look at human reproduction. We're going to get into kind of the structure and function of all the male and female reproductive systems and kind of how things work and how our bodies prepare ourselves for reproduction. So here we go. So the first thing in preparing for us to be able to reproduce is going through puberty. And it's that stage of life where we start to develop our secondary sexual characteristics. And we become sexually mature, so we're able to have children. This is a big time of physical and mental development. And the difference in development in males and females is caused by our genetics and our hormones. We'll talk about what those secondary sexual characteristics are in a bit, but everything that's happening inside our bodies is controlled by hormones. You often say that teenagers are full of hormones. Well, that's exactly true because they are going through puberty and the hormones are controlling that. What is a hormone? Well, hormones are basically chemical messages that travel through your blood, and they are relayed by a major part of your brain called the pituitary gland, and it's what actually sends those chemical cues around for things to happen. So, a little bit more on puberty. Again, hormones, again, are basically chemical signals. They travel through your blood. A hormone that we're probably familiar with is something called adrenaline. Adrenaline is a hormone that is released when you get a good scare, so you get that adrenaline rush. It's released from glands actually near your kidneys. And that once that gets into your blood, it causes your heart rate to increase. It gets your breathing up, and you might get the butterfly feeling in your stomach. Basically, it's what initiates that flight or fight response in your body that says, hey, I'm going to stand my ground, or hey, I got to run and get the heck out of here to stay safe. And that's your body's way of getting you ready for either the flight or the fight. So that's the effects that you can feel of this one type of hormone. And there are special hormones that control all of our sexual functions in males and females, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So if we're looking in females, females have one type of sex hormone. In females, we call that hormone estrogen. And in males, it's called testosterone. And these hormones are released from either the ovaries or the testes. We call them gonads. They're the parts of the female or male body that create the sex hormones and the sex cells. So the ovaries are what produce the eggs and the estrogen. And the testes are what produces the sperm and the testosterone. The easy way to remember it is testosterone, testicles, or testes. The words kind of match up. These are what control your development of your primary and your secondary sexual characteristics. So we should probably define what those two things are. So primary usually means more important, like the most important. So if we're talking about reproducing, the most important things you need for reproducing are your reproductive organs. So the penis in men, the uterus in women, those are what actually allow us to make babies. When we're talking about secondary, it's usually less important. So we're talking about things like breast development in females, pubic hair, those kinds of things. They're not necessary to have to make a baby, but they can. They're secondary in the sense that they can be used to either attract a mate, or they can be used to feed the baby after it's born. Those kinds of things. So, just in these images here, I kind of give you some effects of what estrogen does and what testosterone does, and we'll kind of talk about these as we go through. So a primary sexual characteristic, like I said, is basically, it's the most important thing to having a baby. So if we're talking about males, it's the penis. If we're talking about females, it's the uterus, because you need those things for the babies to be born and be conceived. So they are essential to also making the gametes. So you could also say the ovaries are very important, are a primary characteristic for females, because that's what makes the eggs. Now, a secondary sexual characteristic is what's developed because of our estrogen and testosterone. So they're not directly involved with reproduction, so like guys growing a beard, girls growing breasts, pubic hair, those kinds of things. But so you don't need those things to have a baby, but they do signal to the opposite sex that you are sexually mature, and they sometimes will help you attract the opposite sex, or even just signal that you are of the age that and your body is ready to make babies, so to speak. So we're going to look at puberty in both males and females, and we're going to also look at the parts of the reproductive system for males and females, at least the major points. So in males, typically 10 to 14. Now again, this is a range. Some males may start earlier, some males may be later, but this is kind of usually when things start happening for guys. The male sex hormone is something called testosterone. We mentioned it earlier, and it is secreted by the testes. Basically, once your body's ready to become sexually mature, the pituitary gland in your brain sends a signal down to the testes and says, hey, we're ready to start getting ready to reproduce, so make some testosterone. And what testosterone does is it has all sorts of effects on the male body. One is it increases the male's interest in sex. Girls may have had cooties when a boy was 6 years old, but all of a sudden he's 16 and now they don't have cooties anymore. Voice changes, so your voice deepens, the penis increases in size, you start getting hair growth on your face, your armpits, and your pubic areas. We talked about pheromones and things like that before, so that would be one of the reasons for that. You start getting taller, and your muscles grow bigger. This is usually when the body fat starts redistributing in males and females. So males tend to grow muscles. They start getting more of a kind of a V shape. Their chest, their shoulders widen. Their chest and back muscles get larger, and that's testosterone does that. Lots of guys have taken testosterone as supplements to increase muscle mass when they're working out and things like that. Not sure how legal that really is, but it's kind of like a lower level steroid kind of thing. So that's puberty in males. Puberty in females tends to start quite a bit earlier. There's studies that show that it's starting earlier and earlier all the time. Some people believe that that's due to hormones in our foods and things like that. But typically it occurs in girls between ages of 8 and 13. Again, could be earlier, could be later, depends. Everybody's different. And that's caused by the female sex hormone estrogen. And that's secreted by the ovaries. Same idea. So the pituitary gland sends a message to the ovaries saying, hey, we're of the age where we want to start getting sexually mature. And so the ovaries start to release estrogen. And for girls, this is where you start seeing the breast development occurring. In girls, the body fat redistributes. So the hips round, the thighs maybe get a little bit more of the body fat. So, you know, guys and girls when they're 6 years old, pretty similar in terms of body mass and muscle mass and body fat in terms of their compositions, but things start to change around puberty. The hips get wider. Why would we want wider hips? Well, that's because that's where the baby has to come through, so the hips have to widen out a little bit. Girls grow a little bit taller. You start getting hair growth in your armpits, pubic areas, same kind of thing. But the big thing for females is the menstrual cycle begins. And that's the signal that a woman is able to have children. Once menstruation starts, now she is able to ovulate and able to carry a baby in the womb. So we're going to look at each system independently. So males first and girls second. I'll go through the different organs or parts that we need to talk about, that we should know about. In guys, there's a few glands that we want to talk about. And in girls, the system, there's just major parts that we want to look at. So in guys, the first thing we're going to talk about, basically we're going to work our way from where the sperm are made to where the sperm come out. So the sperm start in the testes or testicles, and they are what produce the sperm and the sex hormones. Now, the sex hormones are controlling all the body functions and stuff, and the sperm, once they're made, they've got to go somewhere. Now, they don't just leave the body, so they've got to be stored somewhere. So the next place the sperm will go to is the epididymis. The epididymis is basically a really long coiled up tube that's found just over top of the testicle, each testicle, and that's where the sperm are mature. They get larger, like after they've been made, they go through interphase, they grow, and they're stored for up to 6 weeks. And eventually, if they don't be used, if they're not used, they'll die, they get reabsorbed back into the body, and the process starts over again. So that's a long coiled tube over the testes, sperm mature, and are stored for up to 6 weeks. Now, if the sperm are going to be released, they need to travel outside the body somehow. So there is a long tube that connects the epididymis to the urethra, where they're going to come out of the penis. And that tube is called a vas deferens. You may have heard of males getting something called a vasectomy. basically that's where you get these tubes cut and tied off so that sperm are not able to be released out of the body. So that's where the term vasectomy comes from, because you're basically cutting the vas deferens. That is your that's the main plumbing tube that goes from the epididymis out of the body. There are some glands that the sperm will pass along the way, and the reason for that is the glands are adding fluids to the sperm, and those fluids are basically meant to nourish the sperm, stimulate the swim, provide that nourishment, that energy for them to be able to travel all that distance. Because remember, these are single tiny little cells, and they've got to travel all the way out of the male's body, all the way up in the female's body to their fallopian tubes near the ovaries. So there's a long ways for these tiny little cells to go. They need energy. The other thing that the fluids that are added provide is a safer environment to protect it from the woman's body, who's basically going to try to kill off all the sperm cells as they get in. That fluid, when you mix the sperm with these fluids, is called semen. I guess I'm going backwards here, but the testes are housed in the scrotum, and that is basically a sac, that's what we call it, that contains the testes, and is found on the outside of the body of males. So the major difference between males and females, our reproductive system is outside of our body, whereas females is inside the body. The scrotum's job is basically to house the testicles, but also to regulate temperature. Guys will know that when they're cold, the scrotum will actually go a little bit lower. It'll move away from the body a little bit. And when we're warm. And when we're cold, it will move up towards the body to try to warm up. So it's trying to maintain the temperature of the sperm. If the sperm get too hot or too cold, they will die. So the idea with the testicles being outside the body is we can regulate the temperature a little bit better. So this is kind of the side view of the male reproductive system. And we'll start at the testicle and work our way up. So the first part there is, at the very, very bottom, is the scrotum. And then inside the scrotum, this large ball-shaped structure is the testicle or testes. And then on the outside, so this is, I'm going to add a line here. This is the testes. On the outside, so this is this coiled up tube that's on the outside. And it's kind of looks like this shape over top. I'm trying to shade it in so you can see it. That is the epididymis. So pen's not writing. Miss. Epididymis. And then this long tube that goes all the way up there, that is the vas deferens. And that is what the doctor would cut if a male was getting the vasectomy. Basically, he's going to cut this tube somewhere in that region and tie it off so that the sperm can't leave the epididymis. So now if you look, the sperm will travel up and all around. This thing here, that's the pubic bone. And it goes up and over this structure here, which is the bladder, past the bladder, around, and now it's starting to go by the glands. So the first gland it encounters is this gland here, and this gland here is called the seminal vesicles. 2S, I-C-L-E-F, or seminal vesicle. I'm just going to put one. Seminal vesicle. And then after the seminal vesicle, it passes the prostate gland. And then there's one more gland it's passing, and that's called the Cowper's gland. So all of these three things are glands. I'll circle the glands. And their job is to add the fluids, the semen, to the sperm. And then as they travel, so they're going to continue past. So all these fluids are being added in as they pass, and then they travel out this part, this last tube. So we call this tube here the urethra, because that's where normally a male would be passing urine through. And then obviously this large structure here is the penis, which houses the urethra. You'll notice in guys, because everybody always wants to ask this question. The bladder is here, so this is where the urine is stored, and the vas deferens is here. So they are actually both ending up in the same tube. So women will ask, or men will ask, well, can you pee when you're having sex? Well, typically there will be a valve here that when the male has an erection, that valve closes so that only the sperm and semen can pass through and the urine is blocked off. That's kind of how that works. But for males, the sperm travels out through the same tube that the urine does. Now, if we flip to the front view, this would be the front view. So again, this would be the scrotum. This is a testes. Now, past the testes, so if we go up through, this would be the epididymis here, and then this would be the vas deferens. Now, in this image, you can't really see the cowpers or the seminal vesicle, but you can see the prostate. The prostate is kind of the larger of the three. Prostate. This one has an arrow pointing to this structure here. This is the bladder. And then once it passes the prostate, we're going to exit the urethra and out the penis. So there's our male reproductive system. That's kind of the pathway that a sperm is going to take. Now we're going to look more in depth at the female. So we're going to start off with the female version of the testicles, which is different. They're called ovaries. Now the ovaries are what control pretty much everything. The ovaries and pituitary gland for women, and it's the testicles and the pituitary gland for men. So the ovaries produce the eggs through meiosis, just like testicles produce sperm through meiosis. They also produce the female hormone estrogen, which also is controlling the menstrual cycle. So the uterus is a really large muscle. Girls will know this because they feel that muscle cramping every month or so when it's trying to shed the lining of the uterus. Its job is where the it's the place where the baby's going to grow. The embryo is going to develop into a fetus, and the fetus is going to grow into a full-grown baby. That's where the baby's going to basically spend 9 months. The whole purpose of the uterus is to provide a safe, nutrient-rich environment for that embryo to develop. Past the uterus is the cervix, and the cervix is basically the place where the uterus narrows, but it will expand. It will it'll open up. It'll dilate, and that's where the baby will come through. But while the woman is pregnant, the cervix will be sealed up and allow the baby to be separated from the outside world. It's basically this really narrow neck of the uterus that leads into the vagina. Now, the vagina is, in terms of reproduction, it's really just the birth canal. It's the place where the baby travels through. Baby doesn't grow in the vagina. The baby's not made in the vagina. The actually fertilization happens up closer to the ovaries, and I'll show you where that is in a minute. That area is actually called the fallopian tubes, and that's the tube that connects the ovary to the uterus. And then inside the ovary are the cells that are going to make the eggs, and we call those cells follicle cells. They're what go through meiosis to make the egg cells and then nutrient-rich helper cells. So this would be a side view of the female body. So if we're looking at the side view, you can see a few different structures here. So if we're starting here, this is the vagina. So this structure right here. Now that's obviously where the penis is going to go, but the sperm are not going to stay in the vagina. They're going to try to travel up towards the fallopian tubes. We'll get to that in a minute. Above the vagina, so this very narrow spot here, this is the cervix. So if you've ever seen like on a movie or something, and the doctor's talking about she's dilated 8 centimeters, 10 centimeters, whatever, that's how much open this has become. So once it's open a certain amount, a baby should be able to fit through. If it's closed, if it's only a couple centimeters, a baby's not going to be able to fit through that. So those contractions the woman's having during labor are pulling, this muscle is pulling itself open so that the baby can pass through it. This whole structure here is called the uterus. And that's where the baby develops. Now in front of the uterus, this is the bladder. So you can see that the urethra in a woman is in a different location. So it's separate from the birth canal. So we have the bladder, the vagina. This would be the rectum on the back. And now if we go to the front view, oops, wrong way. So the front view, this is kind of more what it looks like. So this would be the vagina here again. This is the cervix. Oops. This, again, big structure here is the uterus. Now, the woman has 2 ovaries, just like a male has 2 testicles, and the ovaries are connected to the uterus by the fallopian tubes. Fallopian tubes. And then this is the ovary. There are 2 of them, one on either side. And typically one ovary will release an egg one month, the other one the other month, that kind of thing. So when a baby is trying to be, or we're trying to make a baby, the sperm are going to travel from the vagina through the cervix, and they're going to travel up to the fallopian tubes. And there'll be an egg, if the woman's ovulating, there'll be an egg waiting in that fallopian tube, and that's where the egg and the sperm will meet. And that's where fertilization happens. And eventually, that egg is going to, once it's fertilized, like even if it's not fertilized, it just keeps traveling down the fallopian tube into the uterus and into this area. And if the egg is fertilized, it will try to implant itself. And certain hormones will be released, and basically the menstrual cycle will not, the woman will not get her period because everything's going to say, hey, we're pregnant, close everything off, we don't want anything to leave, and the uterus is going to continue to build, and the embryo is going to implant into the side and start to grow. If the embryo isn't fertilized, the woman will have her menstrual cycle, she'll have her period, and then everything will be washed out, and then it starts all over again the next month. I think that is the end. Yes?